Hello, welcome back to Buckle Up. My name is Jasper and this is the Nissan X-Trail E-Power. Now the X-Trail is the largest SUV that Nissan offers in the UK. So this has smaller siblings in the Juke and the Qashqai, but today we're here to have a look around the largest car that Nissan offers, with this model being available in both 5 and 7 seat versions. But let's start with the styling. Now the front of the X-Trail is probably its best angle, and I think there's a couple of reasons for that. One being you can see some similarities between the funky styling of its smaller siblings, namely the Juke and Qashqai, in these split design of daytime running light and headlamp clusters, and it's quite a nice, refreshing, modern look at the front end. I like this central grille with the black plastic surround. I like this brush guard down here. Now, this is a mid-level trim, a Centre Premium, and if this was a higher spec car, one of the two top specs, you'd have some extra bits of shiny plastic at the front, but I do think this whole design is pretty tasteful and quite modern. Now, these are full LED headlamp clusters. They are pretty good headlamps, and you've got some nice daytime running lights at the top here. The bonnet is actually surprisingly flat. There's no kind of power bulge, but the whole styling at the front is nicely tied together, and it's a relatively understated design, just with some extra little bits to draw your attention in and make it stand out slightly from some of its competitors. Moving down to the side, you'll see quite a raised profile. This is, after all, an SUV, and tying in with that, you've got some roughy-tufty black plastic cladding around your wheel arches to make the car seem a little bit larger. You've got some quite tasteful 18-inch alloy wheels. Now, these are a perfect size for the car. They're not too big, not too brash, and the ride comfort is therefore very good. Your daytime running light clusters curve around to the side of the car. You've got quite a strong bonnet line that meets the bottom of the windscreen. You've got colour-matched wing mirrors and a 360-degree camera system here. You've got tinted glass in the rear windows, some lovely bright work that curves across the top of the car. On higher trim level models, this roof can come as a contrast option. Roof bars, obviously, because it's an SUV. Some chunky plastic cladding at the bottom of the doors here. Large cladding around the wheel arches, and a fuel flap down here. It says E-Power, but you do still put petrol in it because there's no way to charge this up by plugging it in. The roofline of the car does remain relatively high throughout its entire length. However, at the back it does begin to drop off a little, and on a 7-seat model, that means you lose a little bit of headroom in those back 2 seats. Now, the back of the X-Trail is probably my least favourite angle, and that's just because there's quite a lot of bodywork with not too much happening, but I'm not saying it's ugly by any stretch. I do like these rear light clusters. They curve around beautifully from the side of the car to the rear. You've obviously got several badges at the back. You've got your Nissan badge, your X-Trail script across the boot, and your E-Power badge down here as well. You've got the little tiniest hint of a spoiler coming over the rear screen, some nice bits of black plastic cladding, and some more cladding down here. Now, fake kind of brush guardy rear splitter thing, chunky plastic bumper kind of thing. If this was a high spec trim model car, some of this would be shiny plastic, but to be honest, I do quite like this black plastic here. It does make it look pretty off-roady. Now, you may be able to tell it's winter here. The roads around here are awful. This does get quite grubby because it's quite a vertical back end, and that just means that dirt tends to swirl up and stick to it. And that's a slight irritation for me because of where Nissan have put the access point for the boot. Now, this is right down here, nice and low, so it gets lovely and dirty. It's also got a manual boot, this, which surprised me slightly. Now, I do believe an electronic tailgate is available, however, this trim model does not have it. Now, this car is available as both a 5-seater and a 7-seater, and if you want maximum boot capacity, you need to go for the 5-seater, 1.5 turbocharged mild hybrid petrol engined car because that nets you 585 litres of boot space. If you go for the 5-seater E-Power, which this is, you lose 10 litres there, 575, and if you add the 7 seats in, you drop down to 485 litres of space with those 2 rear seats folded. If you pull those seats up, you get 120 litres, which is still actually pretty reasonable, but you're not going to be shoving anything large in here if you are also wanting to carry 7 people at the time. Now, with this just being the 5-seater model, I've got some under boot floor storage, which is where the 6th and 7th seats would be. So this is quite a practical place. One thing I do really like about it is the load lip is at a very good height. It's very wide and it's nice and flat. I've got a 12-volt socket, some tie-down hooks, and that is basically it. However, things do improve inside the cabin. So let's go and have a look at that. Now, I think one of the first things to say about this cabin is how easy it is to get in and out of, you know. And that is because these rear doors actually open up to 90 degrees from the bodywork. And that is excellent. More manufacturers should do this, and it's certainly a very good trait that Nissan have brought over to the X-Trail from the Qashqai, because you just get so much more space to get in and out of. And that would help if you had the 7-seater model. I do not, so I shall just let you know what this is like as a 5-seater. And that is pretty excellent. Now, these seats sit a little bit higher up than the front two, and that means you can see a bit more over the front, so car sickness shouldn't be as much of a problem. And what's the cabin like? You know what? It's actually really nice. I love the material choices. You've got some nice kind of pretty hard plastic at the top, but it's got a lovely texture in it. Then some gorgeous fabric woven into the door card. Yep, there are some hard plastics, but your touch points have nice leather on them with some contrast stitching. And generally, there's a pretty good air of quality in here, which I do really appreciate. You've got ISOFIX on both of the outer seats, and on some levels of this car, you can have these seats heated. With this being a mid-spec car, you don't have heated seats here. Now, the central seat is actually really nice and flat. There's not much of a hump in the centre of the floor, and that means that this is actually pretty comfortable for a passenger. Now, the car's not actually as wide as you might think it is, so that does mean that shoulder room is a little bit tight, but on the whole, for rear passengers, it's excellent back here. Now, this seat is relatively far back, and look how much knee room I have still got. The rear seats here are genuinely probably the place to be, especially with this being the 5-seater. These seats are fixed in position, and there's so much legroom and actually a pretty decent amount of headroom too. Now, if you do go for one with a panoramic sunroof, you do lose a little bit of headroom to allow that sunroof to sit there, but not massively so. In terms of features and practicality back here, you don't actually have too much. So you do get an armrest in the centre, which is a nice flat shape. It's got 2 cup holders in it, and they do fit quite a large bottle of water in. You've got decent sized cup holders in the door pockets as well, so that large bottle of water will sit there no problem. Tiny little cubbies by the grab handles to close the doors, and then down here you've got a USB-C and a USB-A charging port. Rear vents for climate control, however there's no zone for this in this mid-spec car. So the back seats are pretty spacious and very comfortable. Let's see what the front seats are like. Well, yes, the front is just as nice as the back, if not even nicer. You've got the same high quality materials on the door cards, coupled with some extra bits of shiny plastic trim on the dashboard. This whole cabin does genuinely feel pretty spacious and pretty premium. I really like the integration of the 12.3-inch digital infotainment system here, as well as your honking massive driver's gauge cluster, which is also digital. Now, the graphics on both of these are pretty reasonable, but they are not the sharpest system available on the market. That I'd probably say is Hyundai or Kia's. But this is absolutely a very good system. Now, one thing I do have to thank Nissan for is leaving me with some lovely physical buttons for my climate controls. I've got dials to adjust the temperature, buttons to adjust the fan speed, but of course I've got the option to just turn it onto auto and have that do its thing. Dual zone climate control here in the front with of course the sync option, and then you've got your max airflow, recirc, etc, etc. However, this being a mid-spec car, I don't have heated seats, which I do miss a little bit. It would be greatly appreciated on these chilly mornings at the moment. What I do have are some excellent bits of practicality. So, glove box, a little bit disappointing to be honest. You can get the owner's manual in there and a few other bits, but there's a bit of a fuse box hanging about over here. Down here I've got a 12-volt socket, I've got a space for my phone to sit, and again on higher trim cars this would be a wireless Qi charging pad, not the case here. Large cup holders in the centre console. They will take this large bottle of water, both of them, which is good to see. I've got the same sized cup holders in the door cards, as well as some extra space. You can get an ice scraper down here. And this centre console is a floating design. So I've got this section here, which is quite a high section, divides the cabin nicely. And then I've got a large cubby underneath, as well as a split opening central cubby under the armrest, which is soft touch lined at the bottom, so if you drop something in it from a height it won't clatter, and there's a small section at the front, so it's a reasonably practical size and shape, and I do like the split opening element of it. There's a few spaces to leave bits and pieces to drop the key. In terms of design and layout, I like the brown material on the top of the dashboard. It's also squidgy. I've got the dark leather and contrast stitching here, some nice plastic here, some bright work sweeping around the dashboard, and it's all really well tied together, and it does feel very premium. I do genuinely really like the cabin design of this car. I think it's excellent, probably one of the best points about the interior. I've got a drive mode switch down here, and then this is Nissan's little kind of E-shifting gear selector. It's quite easy to use, pretty intuitive, and it does its job very nicely. Let's see if the rest of the driving experience ties up with how good this cabin is. Well, what can I tell you about the X-Trail then? In terms of its driving experience, it's incredibly well controlled, very comfortable, and very easy to just drive. Now, this has a 1.5 litre turbocharged petrol engine under the bonnet. However, that is not connected to the drive wheels in any way, shape or form. What that engine does is it powers a generator, and the electricity generated by that is either fed via a battery pack to the wheels or directly to the electric motor through an inverter if the demand is instantaneous. So this is a very similar system to Honda's eHEV system, except this one is never actually connected to the wheels. Honda's system does have the option at low demand, high speed driving to connect the engine directly to the wheels. However, Nissan's system keeps the two completely separate at all times. What this means is this is essentially an electric car that is petrol powered, which on the face of it seems odd, ridiculous, you know, kind of weird, but in practice it does work pretty well. So what you get really is a petrol powered driving experience, but one that is much more like that of an electric car. And what that actually means is that it's really smooth, it's really quiet, it's easy to control, and it's relatively efficient. So the X-Trail is quite a big car, and with careful driving, I've easily managed to achieve about 42 miles to the gallon, which for something this big and petrol powered isn't too bad at all, really. Now, in mixed commuting driving, I've seen somewhere in the region of 33 miles to the gallon, which again, for something of this size and shape, and capable, in theory, of seating 7 people, not too bad, especially given the roads that I commute on aren't great for efficient driving. Now, it's not the most efficient system available, so I think if you had a plug-in hybrid or even a self-charging hybrid from the likes of Kia or Hyundai, you'd potentially be looking at better fuel economy than is achievable in the E-Power. In terms of performance, it's not too bad. So this system is driven purely by an electric motor, and that is connected to the front axle because this is the 204 bhp version of the E-Power powertrain. And that means I've got a single electric motor, peak performance output is 204 bhp, and peak torque is 330 newton meters. Now, that 330 newton meters isn't a tremendous amount for a vehicle of this size, and the combined effect of that is that essentially your 0 to 62 time is about 8 seconds, which is acceptable, but it's not going to blow your socks off. The powertrain and the power delivery is really smooth. This car is pretty comfortable. It's certainly one of the better riding large SUVs like this that I've driven. It soaks up bumps very well, the suspension is very compliant, it doesn't crash too much unless you're on a very rough surface, and essentially it's a very easy car to drive and be very comfortable in. These seats are really comfortable, there's so much adjustment in them, even though on this trim they are manually adjusted. When it comes to urban or town driving, this car is pretty good. The electric power delivery obviously is a tremendous benefit in that regard because it's so smooth, it's very quick off the line generally, and it just whirs away in the background. The engine is not particularly intrusive unless you are really putting your foot down, and I do very much like that about this car. It's one that encourages you to drive sensibly and to try and get the best fuel economy possible. In terms of driver tech and assists, you've got full LED headlamps which are automatic. The auto high beam assist in this is actually pretty good. I've got auto wipers, I've got a 360 degree camera system, and I've got Nissan's suite of speed sign recognition, adaptive cruise control, and smart speed limit suggestion for that cruise control. So if you go from a 30 mile an hour to a 50 mile an hour zone with adaptive cruise control on, it will recommend you change the set speed to 50 miles an hour. The driver assistance systems in this car, I think, generally are brilliant. They aren't too intrusive, they are very subtle with their reminders or suggestions for you, and they're very well engineered. I haven't found myself irritated by them or wanting to turn them off. They're very good at just working away in the background, which is greatly appreciated. The car is pretty easy to place. It's narrower than you'd think for the size of the vehicle it is, so that means that I found it pretty easy to squeeze it through gaps. And when you pair that with the easy powertrain and the excellent 360 degree camera system, it's very sharp this. Nissan are very good at 360 degree camera systems, I think. It's pretty easy to place this car and know exactly where the extremities are, even though the front of it does drop away quite sharply. I found this car pretty good to just jump in and take on a journey because it doesn't require a great deal of concentration to place on the road. Even though it is quite a large vehicle, stuff like parking in car parks is pretty easy as well because of that camera system and because of the parking sensors you have. Now, in terms of dynamics, this isn't really that good. It's not that kind of car though. So yes, it will follow the road and it will go around a corner relatively easily, but there is a little bit of body roll because the suspension isn't the firmest. However, it is very comfortable, and certainly on these 18-inch alloy wheels, I think that's a very good thing. It handles low and high speed driving incredibly well. It's very comfortable on a motorway at 70 miles an hour, and it's equally as comfortable on a country road at 40 to 50 miles an hour, following the turns and the twists of the road. This model is available with a range of powertrains, so if you don't want the electric driving experience, it's possible to get this with a 1.5 litre turbocharged petrol that delivers about 163 brake horsepower, which I think would feel a little bit underpowered, to be honest, in a car this size. If you go for e-Power, you get the option of this, which is a 204 brake horsepower model, or you can step up to the e-Force all-wheel drive model, which puts an additional motor on the rear axle, but only increases the power output to about 210 brake horsepower. So you don't get a massive power bump, but you do get that additional stability and grip offered by an all-wheel drive system, which, if you do require that for your kind of driving, would probably be worth the upgrade. So, the X-Trail. For a car that's trying to be a lot of things to a lot of people, I'd say it does a pretty good job. It covers quite a wide range of pricing, but if you're going for something that's mid-spec or above, it's relatively competitively priced, and it certainly offers you just about enough practicality to make it pretty easy to live with. Now, if you are looking to regularly carry 7 people, I'd probably urge you to look at something like the Hyundai Santa Fe, the Kia Sorento, or maybe even the SsangYong Rexton, all of which we have featured on the channel and we rate pretty highly. This is certainly a good drive. The only thing that it suffers in slightly is the interior space if you want those 7 seats. I can absolutely see why somebody would buy this, and I would recommend it if you are looking for a 7-seater where you only need those 6th and 7th seats in a pinch as opposed to for regular use. That is everything in today's video, so thank you very much for watching. Please remember to like, comment and subscribe. There are a few ways you can support the channel, all linked down in the video description, and we will see you in the next video. Bye!